over. So it's cool to see you guys all connected. Yeah, there's the photo of him. Look at that. Apparently, did you guys hear the story? Apparently, he was crocheting like a holder for his gold medal. How cool. Look at us. Look at us all connected. This is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what it means to be deeply, deeply connected with one another. We're in this new series called Called Out, what it is to be the church, what the church is. And we've been learning that the church is a people who are gathered around the person of Jesus, and together we are distinctly called to live out these three loves: loving God, loving our neighbors, and loving one another, these other folks in our faith community who are following Jesus, the people in front of you and behind you and to the side of you. We are called to be deeply connected, to love one another. And this is a super timely message, right? We are called to be connected, to be in deep sacrificial relationships with one another. And this is timely. This is an important message because the truth is we live in a disconnected world. We live in a world that's focused on me, what I get out of community. You guys can set that down. We'll come back to it later. We live in a world that is more disconnected, more isolated than ever before. In the midst of all of these cool technological advancements where we can be informationally connected, in all these cool ways where we are proximate and we are up next to each other, the truth is we're disconnected as a people. In 2016, 3 years before COVID-19 even hit, a well-known doctor, a secular doctor, he wrote in the New York Times an article entitled, "How Social Isolation is Killing Us." And this article immediately hit a nerve and got spread around like wildfire and quoted and requoted and reshared. And I'll just read one thing he says in his article. He says, "Social isolation, this disconnectedness from one another," he says this, "is a growing epidemic." It's growing. It's just getting worse, where we're right next to each other and yet we're so far from each other. We're so disconnected. It's a growing epidemic, one that's increasingly recognized as having dire physical, mental, and emotional consequences. He's a doctor and he's saying, look, I'm seeing this more and more and more over my years of practice, that we are increasingly disconnected and it's doing something to each one of us. It has dire effects on us. You could say, in other words, that we aren't meant to do life alone. God has never designed us to be disconnected, but to be connected deeply with one another. When I think about this disconnection, I think of another artist about the same time of this article coming out in the New Yorker. There was an artist by the name of Matt Schneider who was commissioned to do this artwork to describe this social isolation. And this is what he came up with. You see this guy curved over. He's got some tattoos going on. What is he holding? Anybody see what he's holding? A device. Yeah, he's got one of these digital devices and he's curved over. And it's really interesting. This is his rendition, this artist's rendition of what it means to be socially isolated, disconnected. Right now, this growing epidemic, this is how he interprets it as an artist. What's more interesting to me is what he titles this picture in the New Yorker. It's Latin. It's the words incurvatus in se. Incurvatus in se. That's Latin for turned inward on oneself. And this is actually language, an old theological idea that this is absolutely what sin does to each one of us. When we live in sin, we curve inward on ourselves and isolate ourselves from God and others. We become disconnected. When it comes to community, we curve ourselves inward and we say, well, I'll be a part of that thing based on what I get out of it. Like, does it make me feel good? Right? Will I invest in this community? What do I get out of it? It's all about me. I get a bad case of the me's. Everybody say me. Me. Say it again. Me. Incurvatus, this curved inwardness, this sinful kind of thing that disconnects us, is a bad case of the me's, where I say, well, I'll show up to your thing. I'll be a part of your community based on what I get out of it. It's about me, right? The bottom line, my time, my resources, my business, me, my calendar, right? The beauty of Jesus that we're going to look at just briefly today is that Jesus came to confront this condition, this curved inwardness, this sin. Jesus came to reconnect us to the Father and then together to connect us in something called the church. The ecclesia, this group of people gathered around Jesus, and through faith in Jesus, the forgiveness of our sin and the opportunity through Jesus to actually curve outward, to be people who are open to God's love and open to connection with God, open to connection with one another. The church is Jesus' idea. It's mentioned more than 107 times in the New Testament, and the very first time the church is mentioned, it's through Jesus. It's his words. Jesus speaks about the church the very first time in our New Testament in Matthew 16:18. He gathers some folks together, some disciples, and he looks at them, these people who have vested themselves in him, who are trusting him as Lord, and he says, upon you, I will build my church. The church matters to Jesus. And I know I've heard this so much as we've regathered. I've even said this, and this is an honest sentiment. I'm glad we're saying this, but I've heard a lot of people be like, oh man, coming out of shelter in place as we're getting back and settled in the fall, I am just so glad to be back in church. I miss church. And that's a great thing to say. It conveys there's something meaningful that happens here, but I want you to understand that Jesus wants us to do way more than just miss the church. He wants us to do something way more than just have an affinity or think this is a good thing that we squeeze in our schedule. Jesus, he has come. His mission is to build the church, to find people who are isolated, who are far from God, and to draw them to the Father's love and then into community. You see, Jesus wants us to do more than miss the church. He wants us to love the church. This is how he says it. A new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if what? If you love one another. Jesus says, hey man, it's great you missed the church, but I've come so that you would love the church, love the people to the left and to the right of you, in front of you, behind you, up in the balcony, that you would love this church that I am gathering. This is what I am doing, and I'm calling you to love, to be deeply connected with the people to the left and to the right, the church, the people all around you. Jesus says we're to love one another sacrificially, deeply, the way he has loved us. Now, one of the best illustrations I found of this is in nature, and it's actually right here in our California backyard. Just north of us are these huge old redwood trees. They're absolutely amazing. I mean, they take your breath away when you get to see them. We have several state parks just north of us where you can see these giant redwood trees. Show of hands, how many of you guys have gone and seen? Yeah, lots of us in the room. Wow, look at that. Lots of us in the room have gone and seen these gigantic, amazing redwood trees. And actually, there's a graphic you'll see that shows in California, we have actually, isn't that amazing? Look how big those are. Fast forward to the photo of the trees compared to a building. Yeah. In California, we have these giant sequoia redwood and then these coastal redwoods. And you can see in comparison height-wise, there's like an apple tree and a 10-story, and then these massive, massive trees. They can grow to be 35 stories tall. They're just massive. Some of them you can't even drive through. They're that big. Or people have carved out a hole and you can walk through them. One of the really amazing things about these trees is their roots, their root system. Last week we talked about going deep, but the beautiful thing about redwood trees is that they actually grow wide. Even though they're so tall, you would think they'd have a really deep root system. Their root system actually doesn't go very deep at all, 6 feet or less. But instead of putting all their energy and going deep, they go wide. And the reality of why they do that is because these redwood trees, they never grow alone. They never grow in isolation. They always grow in a redwood grove. You see it even in that picture, with their tree roots all enmeshed in one another. In other words, it would be ludicrous to try and think of a redwood tree growing by itself. It just would never do that. They grow in a community of connectedness through their roots. They grow wide. And it's really amazing through this root system. They grow as far as like 100 feet wide through this root system of being enmeshed with one another. They're able to withstand all of the forces of nature, fire, wind, rain, floods, all of this stuff. And even cooler than that, they actually share the nutrients that they get in their roots with one another. Love as I have loved you. Sacrificially be connected as I have been connected with you. Life alone isn't just difficult. It's impossible. Jesus says, I have come to reconnect you to the Father and to one another. I've come so that you might experience life and life to the fullest, and that means your roots have to grow wide. Love one another as I have loved you. Be deeply connected with one another. We are a people, the church, those of you who follow Christ, we're a people who are called to love one another and to become everything that God has designed you to be, everything that you and I long to become. We must do this journey together. We must invest in one another. Ephesians 4, the Apostle Paul, who's just started this little church in Ephesus in the first century, this is how he says it. Ephesians chapter 4. Therefore, I, a prisoner for serving the Lord, beg you, I plead with you. If there's one thing I could tell you, that's what he's saying. And who is he talking to? Who's the you? It's plural. It's you all. It's everybody who calls themselves a Christ follower who have been gathered together in church. He says, I beg you, wake up to this. I want you to hear this. Lead a life worthy of your calling, for you have been called by God. There's that idea again of being called out to live in a distinctly different way. In a world that is so disconnected, the church is the hope of the world, of being a people who are deeply connected. I long for you to live this way. Live out this calling, he says. Always be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's faults because of your love. Make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit. Look at this. Binding yourselves together like tree roots. Like be deeply connected. Bind yourself together in community with peace. And then he goes on to say that you and I, we have different gifts and talents. And he calls the church to invest those talents in one another so we will grow. And I want to draw our attention to verse 13. He says, this growth will continue until we all come to such unity of our faith and knowledge of God's Son that we will be mature in the Lord, measuring up to the full and complete standard of Christ. Paul is saying something so cool in verse 13 right here. He combines two things that are there's such an antithesis to a world of disconnection. He says, look, if you want to grow, maturity, if you want to become the person God has designed you to be, if you want to follow Jesus, if you made that commitment to become like Christ in all areas of your life, then it's done in unity. It's done in community. In other words, he's saying that there's no way that we can grow up until we show up in the lives of the church family around us. We cannot follow Christ alone. It's not only difficult, it is impossible. And as we are moving into this season, this fall, this busyness, all this stuff happening, as we hopefully, God willing, have COVID in our rearview mirror, the invitation for you and I is to love one another, to invest in one another. We have to show up. If we want to grow up, we have to show up in the lives of one another here. Now, I think it's pretty cool. Paul is not prescriptive, okay? He doesn't say, show up in this way and that way and whatever. This is a heart issue. Paul is saying, live your life curved outward. Don't curve inward. Don't give into the flesh and me, my, all that good stuff. He says curve outward and look for opportunities. This is a heart issue. You have to have a heart that wants to show up in the lives of others. As your pastor, I'm going to try and make this even more practical, and I'm going to give you a few ways that I think in this season we need to show up in the lives of this church family. And the first one is really simple. You're doing it right now. We need to show up in the worship of our church family. We need to show up on the weekends and gather together and worship. Something unique happens. Jesus said, when 3 or more are gathered in my name, there I am also. Like when we gather, some supernatural way Jesus is with us. And as we open the Word and as we worship together collectively, in a few months, as we actually leave this building and go out on a weekend and serve in our community, God is writing this incredible story in real time. And we want to be a part of that. We got to show up. And here's what I was thinking really simply. There's 52 Sundays in a year. Think about showing up for those 52 Sundays. How many of those Sundays will you show up in the life of what God's doing here? Be a part of it. Be transformed. Use your gifts. Inform it. Be a part of it. What does that look like? You know, we got a plan, I do, for how many days within a week I'm going to go running and cycling and work out, whatever. I got a plan for my finances when it comes to how many Sundays I'm committed to being in this church family, to show up for our worship. Do you have a number? Should we? I think we should. I think we got to figure out showing up. You know, the pendulum swung for some time. The conversation was like, hey, you know, the church is in a building. The church is not an institution, which is true. The church is the people of God who He's gathered. And that pendulum swung so far in a disconnected society that now what I hear is like, well, I can just worship God at home in my pajamas, eating bonbons, and just kind of do faith on my own. And that's just not true. The church of God is a collective y'all. It's us together and God moving amongst our interconnectedness, our roots. Love one another by showing up in the worship that we do together on the weekends. Another area for us to look at the fall is to show up in smaller ways in the lives of people here. Starting next week, we're going to have 3 weeks in a row where you're going to hear about life groups, smaller community, where you can take this big church and make it small and do life and faith with others in community. I just encourage you, those of you who are in a life group, get ready, show up, be ready. Good job. Those of you who haven't explored that yet, please, I implore you, using Paul's words, I beg you, you cannot follow Christ alone. It's not just difficult, it's impossible. Find some people to do life and faith with. We got to show up in the lives of our church family through worship, through life groups, smaller community. And then finally, I just want to encourage you with this. We got to look for ways to show up in the needs of this church family right here. We got to show up in the needs of one another. James, in the book of James, he's like, man, if you see a brother or sister in need, and then you're like, I'll pray for you. He's like, man, you just missed out on this huge, please do more than that. Like, we are to show up, just like those roots share the nutrient, like we are the body of Christ to meet the needs of one another. I'm so proud of so many of you. I emailed some of our life groups and some of our leaders, and you guys did that. We had a need in our church, and you guys met that need in a miraculous way. God used you to bless somebody recently in our community. I just say thank you. There's also ongoing needs as we gather on the weekend that God has gifted you to be a part of. Just even your presence in our different ministries over the weekend. Man, I can't even begin to tell you how incredible that is to have your presence in those ways. Show up in the lives of one another. Push against a culture of disconnectedness. This is the invitation and the call of Jesus. I'm going to call the band on up. And as they come up, we're going to transition to a time in our service where we're celebrating some folks in our community who are making that commitment to follow Jesus, to pursue Jesus in the context of community here at Westgate South Hills campus. We call this 640 Discipleship here at Westgate Church. And what that means, it's from the verse 640, Luke 640, is that we want to apprentice. We want to become like Jesus in the way that we love God, we love our neighbors, and we love one another. And there's some folks who have gone through a 9-week course that we offer to explore that, who have made a commitment to that in the context of doing this life and faith in this community. And we want to honor you. You got an email. You know who you are because we emailed you. In fact, let me back up. During COVID, we've had over both of our campuses more than 200 people go through this course. This is amazing. This is why we exist. Out in our lobby are some paper cranes. We exist to invite people to become disciples of Jesus, to become apprentices. And within our community here, about 35 people have made that commitment, have gone through that course. And there's a few of you who were able to be here today. You RSVP'd. If you got the email, you know what I'm talking about. You got the shirt. I want you to stand up because we're going to actually honor you in our service. Yeah, there's Karita right there. Yeah, thank you. So band, why don't you guys start rocking some music? And what I want to say, you guys can stay standing. I'm going to invite those of you who have previously committed to being 640. You've gone through it. You know what I'm talking about. Westgate South Hills is your church family. I want you to stand next to these folks who have stood up. So go ahead and stand. And if you're still seated and feeling awkward, here's what I got to say. These people who are standing, they're not more holy than you. God doesn't love them more than you. I want to thank you for allowing us to have just a family moment of our 640s, those who have committed to being followers of Christ in the context of community, inviting in, welcoming in those who have recently made that commitment through our 640 program. So here's what we're going to do. Thanks to Liz Diddy, we were able to put together some liturgy, and we hope to do this as part of our service, almost like Redwood Groves, inviting more redwoods into the grove, right? This is kind of what we're doing. Those of you who stood first, you and I are going to read some liturgy. We're going to read these words from 640. This is to mark this moment where we step into community, into this commitment to follow Christ. Some of you have been Christ followers for a while, but this is the first time we're doing this together. And then the church family, those of you who've already made that commitment, you're going to read with Karina. You're going to welcome these folks in. And then we're going to continue in worship. So, make sense? Those of you who stood first, read with me. This is an important moment in our church history, like baptisms, like baby dedications. We are becoming the church. Jesus said, I will build my church. And that's what we're experiencing even as we read this liturgy. Those of you who stood up first, read with me these words. Let's read them together out loud. I am an apprentice to Jesus, joining our community of Jesus followers. We love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength because God loved us. The rest of the church, read with Karina.
We are the church, the family of God.
I am committed to our community as we journey together with Jesus, humbly using my gifts, talents, resources, and energy to serve you. We'll love one another as God's plan to care for each other.
We are the church, the body of Christ.
I am God's representative in our world, his hands and feet to reach the broken. May God's kingdom come and his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We love our neighbors like Jesus does.
We are the church, God's light in our world.
Stay standing. Let me pray for you. Father, this is no small task to love and to live like you. It's countercultural. And I pray for those who have gone through this course that are representing 35 or so just at this campus in this season. I pray that you'd strengthen them by your love and by your power. And together, the church together, we're making this recommitment of our heart towards you, God. We want to be the church, to deeply love you and our world and even one another. Would you help us do that in Jesus' powerful name? Amen. Amen. You guys can have a seat. We're going to sing a song that really is our recommitment to live and love like Jesus in the context of community. And those of you who recently went through 640, who stood, you know who you are. We want to invite you to come up on either side during this song and just write your name on one of these name tags. And later, at another time, we'll stick them up at an art install in our lobby, some paper cranes. Right now, there's some paper cranes that already have names, people who have made that commitment. But there's a lot more paper cranes where it's still blank. And that's our vision, that God would use us to invite more men and women to become Christ followers. It's a visual reminder for us. So those of you who are making that commitment, who have just completed that class, would you come forward and sign your name? If you know that you are 640 and you haven't signed, please come forward as well. And let's commit our hearts again afresh to love and live like Jesus. I invited a friend of mine, Brian, to come up here on stage. Brian, come on up. Would you all say hi, Brian? Hi. Yeah. My buddy Brian is now on the San Jose PD. He's a chaplain for the San Jose PD. And we've known each other for a long time. Dude, it's good to see you. And
28 years, man.
Yeah, so when I first met Brian, this is on. You can just sit here with me. I wanted to kind of end, as we're talking about what it means to really show up in one another's lives, getting a chance for you to meet Brian, because last week, if you were with us, you know I shared that I grew up pretty much fatherless, and then my dad died when I was 16, and some of the challenge around that. The beauty of the church, this people who are gathered together, who show up in the lives of each other, for me is not just like something theological to talk about. It's something I've lived. Even though there was some need in my life, Brian and some other guys in my church family growing up, they made a point to show up in my life. And some of the things I was lacking, God blessed me with like older men who became spiritual fathers or older brothers for me. And he was my youth leader. He was my volunteer youth leader for many, many years. And so I wondered if, as we're talking about what it means to really show up in lives of one another, if I could just ask you some questions. We haven't talked a lot. We've talked a bit over the years, but I'm really interested to hear what you have to say when it comes to showing up in lives. So the first question I have is, how did you get involved as a youth leader? Like, what caused you to step in and volunteer and serve as a youth leader?
Sure.
Yeah.
Growing up in the church, I definitely felt like I had people in my life that constantly poured into me. Back from when I was in second grade, Mr. Brown was my Sunday school teacher, taught me the benefit of memorizing scripture. I memorized Psalm 23 so that I could go to Aloha Roller Palace on Blossom Hill for
Aloha.
free. So he took
yeah,
me,
you got a lot of fans, yeah.
So I'm like, I'll do that so I can get that. I had that in second grade. I got in junior high. I had a guy named Doug Braga, who I'm still friends with today, who mentored me, who poured into me, who told me I had sin in my life, who helped me through hard times. Got in high school, a guy named Brian Unger, who also mentored you, poured into me for 4 years of my life, teaching me about ministry, about what it was to serve God, helping me through all my girl issues and struggles and difficult times. So when I got out of high school, my reason was I want to go back and I want to bless other high school kids. Because I had people that poured into me for years. I want to turn around and do the same thing for someone else.
It's awesome. So this is scary to ask, but I'm going to ask it. Brian's like an honest guy. So what do you remember about me as a kid? What was I like? And then the follow-up question was there ever times you just want to give up on me or other students? But what was I like first?
My first memory of you was I knew your sister first, and so you were just little Gridley.
Gridley.
Yeah, so when I started working with high schoolers, you were a freshman. I was a freshman in college, or sophomore in college. And you were a scrawny little kid who didn't say anything, who I didn't think really had much to say ever.
I was quiet.
Mark and Jack were in our small group, and those guys would never close their mouths. And so you were always, I was trying to pull you out, and you hardly ever had anything to say at the beginning.
Whoa. I can't picture myself quiet, but apparently I was, and scrawny. I wish I was more scrawny these days. But so serving isn't always like amazing. Right? Some days you show up and you're showing up in the lives of people. And I just wonder, were there ever days with me or other students where you just felt like giving up or you kind of question what you're doing?
Definitely. There were times where you guys were obnoxious and wouldn't listen. We're trying to get through the Bible, we're trying to study, and they just goofed around all the time. And it was frustrating. There were times where I just wanted to walk out and be like, you know what, I'm done. I've worked hard to be here, and you guys just are goofing around. And but I think the thing is that God kept reminding me is that I just need to be here every day, every Wednesday, calling them, hanging out, going, getting coffee, doing things, because I know that it's about the long game. It's not this short little quick thing here and there. And now to be able to look back and see that you're pastor of a church, I have other students that are now missionaries all over the world, that are other people that are pastors, leading worship, started ministries of their own. It's incredible to think of all the last 30 years of my life, looking now at all the people that I touched, like how many places God has them serving all over, and it's amazing.
Yeah, it's fun to think. I mean, you weren't paid to do that. You were just part of the body, and this was a call God gave you to step in and show up. And I think one of the things you said that's really powerful to me is it was the consistency, the willingness to just be there, the proximity. It wasn't necessarily something you said every week that was mind-blowing. It was just the consistent grind of showing up and loving like Jesus. What did you see change in me or in other kids as you
I think
served us?
you shared that you had shared this with your congregation, that your sophomore year, I got a call from my dad. My dad's a pastor of the church we grew up in, and he said, Andy's dad has died. Go do something. go talk. I just wanted you to know. And I went, okay, I'm 19. What in the world do I say to a kid who just lost their dad? I have no idea. And I remember driving over there just panicking, thinking, what am I doing? I have no training. I have no idea how to do anything grief-related. I knocked on your door. You came out, and we just sat on the porch for like 3 hours. And I remember having no clue what to do, no idea what to say. But I remember my dad told me, if you just get him to talk about his dad, that'll help him. So just talk about it. And so I remember asking you, tell me about your dad. I don't know him. And you just shared with me, we did this and we used to do that. And it gave us a bond and a connection from that from the years after that, even to this day, I feel like we're connected because of the fact that I just showed up that day and I just hung out with you. And the cool thing is, years later as a police chaplain, I've been in environments where I go, I don't know what I'm doing here. How am I going to help this family? And what clicks in my head, remember, Andy, what your dad told you? Do the same thing. And so even now, I still remember what happened that day where I just asked people, hey, tell me about your loved ones. I know you love them. Tell me about it. And so things that I learned when I was 19, in that moment with you, my first sort of real worst case scenario ministry, was just be there, talk to them, and let them know you care. And so I saw in you a growth after that of learning to take your silly music keyboard where you create these really weird songs.
Yeah, have a worship side, musical side.
And this like artistic side. He drew me a picture when he graduated from high school that I sent to you the other day, reminding you, and on the back of it's a note, and where, Andy, you just shared, thank you for pouring into my life and all this stuff. But
we got it right there. Yeah, so I drew this for Brian as I was going off to college. I used to do a lot of cartooning. And that was actually a snapshot of one of our life groups. We can't go into the story now, but basically someone was eating a graham cracker in our life group that had something squirming on it.
Yes.
But on the back, I wrote some things. Yeah. And actually, I want to read them right now.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can put that silly picture down. This is going to be hard to do. Again, just kind of recognizing some of the need that I had in my life. And this isn't theoretical, you guys. This idea of showing up, it's everything. It really is. To be a connected church is such a hope in our disconnected world. It's why Jesus came. I will build my church. I will build people who love like I love them. And so this is what's on the back of that silly drawing, this letter. I wrote this probably 17 years old, I'm guessing.
It said June 97 on the top. So.
Dear Brian, I wanted to take a moment and tell you how important you've been in my life. A lot of who I am has to do with you and who you are. I wasn't going to do that. I've respected and looked up to you, and it is by your example that I've learned how to respond, how to listen, how to be truthful, and to be a man of integrity. There was so few examples for me of that, guys. To be a man of integrity. You're an awesome person who I strive to be like in many ways. God is really using you. You've been there through all my hard times and most of my good times too. As my small group leader, you weren't afraid to share what you were struggling with. And by doing so, you gave me the strength to battle and continue battling with the things that I struggle in my life too. And I'm going to edit out a bunch of embarrassing things that I wrote.
That's
and
good.
then I'll say this. Thanks.
I do have a copy of it still if anyone...
To the highest bidder, thanks for always being there. You always are willing to take time out and talk. Love, Andy. And so today, Brian, as we were on this topic, I just wanted to say thank you. And would you help me thank Brian? Want any closing words?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Andy, for having me here, and just encourage to you guys that back like when I was young, I had no idea that my life would make a difference. And the fact that now he's here making a difference in your lives every week, it's because I took the time to do it. But it was because I had Mr. Brown and Doug and Brian who poured into me. So you may think that what you're doing now, I'm just working in a Sunday school class, or I'm ushering at the door, greeting people. Every single thing that you do in this church, every single person that you pour into and love on and smile at and say, let's go get coffee, and send them an email when you heard someone in their life died, or just showing up for people. It's huge. And it makes a massive difference. And you never have any idea the person that you're pouring into might turn into the next Andy Gridley, who's a pastor that loves
Lord,
people
help us.
and cares for people. Yeah. So I just want to encourage you to don't ever pass by those moments where God puts on your heart. Go talk to that person. Go help that person. Because it makes a huge difference in everyone's lives and forever, for the future.
Yeah,
So
thank you. Thanks. You can take off. Thanks, man. Thank you. So as we are concluding today, I want to put in front of you one of the greatest opportunities and needs that we have when it comes to showing up in the lives of people right here in our church family. And they're with us today. Our greatest need, our greatest opportunity to show up in the lives of our church family are our kids and our students. And they're with us today. And I want to ask you to prayerfully consider in this season that we're in, if there isn't a way that you would be willing to show up, if you would show up in the lives of our kids and our students. And the reason being is things are different post the last year or so, post-COVID. And it's not just our church. In fact, I talked to another large church just down the street. They're only able to offer, out of multiple worship services, they're only able to offer one service with kids programming. And here, it's not just like we watch your kids, like we're discipling them. We're connecting them to Jesus. We're creating environments where they learn how to pray and to worship. We're doing this with our students. I see Kit back here who volunteers his time to love some of the young men just the way Brian did in my life. This is not a program. I'm not asking you to fill a need. I'm asking you to show up in some people's lives. And so we've actually created our service to end early. Like what I'm asking you right now will not impact your calendar. Okay, it's within the time commitment you normally give us right now. I'm going to ask you to just hang out after I do a closing benediction. And then Shalene, who leads our Kids Town program, and Bobby, who leads our student ministries, they're going to come up. They have 5 minutes each to just share a bit of vision and heart of what they do and some specific ways you can get involved. And we've sweetened the deal, okay? We're calling it Cupcakes and Convos. Cupcakes and convos. And what we want to do is bribe you with sugar. Your kids, students can hang out here or whatever. And for less than 10 minutes, we're just going to share with you about these really, really important environments where we need you to step in. It's just different this season. It may not be for forever, but we need you to serve sometimes, to show up sometimes in the lives of our kids and our students. You've been the most generous church. Whenever I've asked something, you've done it. So I'm not trying to strong arm you. I'm just trying to be real clear that we need this. We need this now. In fact, some of the weeks where I've had less responsibility on this stage, I've gone in last minute to help in Club 45 with our 4th and 5th graders, and I'll tell you, I had the time of my life. I actually kind of grieved that I couldn't do it more often. Bobby's invited me in this season, in the summer, to actually show up in some environments with students. I'm doing it. I'm not asking you to do anything I'm not willing to do myself. You're going to hear about some real specific ways that you can show up in their lives, and I hope you'll stick around to do that. Cupcakes and convos. We're going to bribe you, and you're going to hear a great vision, and we'll still end on time. So now, I know not everyone can do that. You need to get out of here. It's okay. We don't love you any less. God doesn't love you any less. We're going to end with the benediction. I'm going to have you stand on up, send you out with the benediction if you need to go, but otherwise just stretch. It's just a stretch break, and you'll sit back down, and in 1 minute, we're going to get started with some cupcakes, okay? Here's the benediction. This is my favorite verse. In fact, when we merged with South Hills and this stage, you guys, some of you remember this stage didn't have carpet yet. We wrote names of people that we pray would come to know the love of Jesus, that he would reconnect them to the Father's love and into community. We wrote these names all over the stage and we carpeted it. And that night, as we gathered as this new merged, whatever we are, in Ephesians 1, 20 through 23, in the message, this came to me and I was like, this is a theme that God has for us. At the center of all this, Christ rules the church. The church you see is not peripheral to the world. The world is peripheral to the church. The church is Christ's body in which he speaks and acts and by which he fills everything with his presence. So as we go from this place, may we love one another, the church. May we love one another the way Jesus loves us. May we be people who show up in the lives and the needs of one another. God bless you guys. You got a minute.